Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Peugeot. The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Media Clip, Advertech Printing, and Independent Photo Imagers.
Hello again, and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Peugeot, and today we're joined by Celi Arias. She's coming to us from Long Island, New York, and she's the CEO and founder of The Grown Ass Business. And she's going to be giving us great advice, practical advice on running your business. Hey, Celi, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So, Celi, how did you get into this business? What's your story leading up to today in the business world?
Well, it's a long story. Usually when I tell people my various career paths, they're like, you don't look that old. I'm like, I promise I am that old. I'm actually excited to be on your show because I am a creative. And my husband a while ago was saying, you're not creative. You're not a creative. You're like a systems operations person. Mm-hmm. And I would say, yes, I got here by way of being a creative and having creative businesses and realizing some of the pitfalls and downfalls that come with being a creative and also running your business as a creative. So I actually have a degree in modern dance. I was a professional dancer in high school and college and right out of college. And then I went and got a second degree in fashion design and started a fashion label and ran a fashion label in South America for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I made all the business's mistakes that you could imagine. All those mistakes that you're like, oh God, why did I've probably done it too. Mm-hmm. And I have been in times in my life where I had no home and was sleeping on an air mattress in my factory floor. Mm-hmm. So I always say, I have been there with you. I have been in the lows of the lows, and I've also been in the highs of the highs. It's possible in business. So I started to get very curious. Once I got over the ego bruising and the pain and the hurt of it all, I went and got an MBA, and I found that the MBA didn't answer my questions and didn't actually help fill some of the gaps that felt like gaps to me when I was a business owner. So I got more and more curious about what that was and how to address those things that I found so hard in my 20s when I had my first business. So I worked my way into corporate experiences in high luxury sales and brand partnerships. And then I've discovered in that journey that what I really liked was fixing the systems and making everyone's lives easier. I'm a little bit, as a fashion designer, I'm a little bit of an engineer anyway. So fashion designers really, if you like to make the things, you like to take things apart from the very beginning and build them. So
deconstruct and then reconstruct.
You deconstruct, or you know how to construct from nothing, right? You take a piece of paper and you can turn that into a 3D wearable piece of art. So I think I just got interested in understanding business, and I discovered this thing called operations, and I worked my way into operations at a few startups. I became a COO, and I helped sell a few multi-seven-figure businesses. And then once I did that, I started getting asked to coach. And I coached for a company and discovered there were gaps in that system that I was a part of. So I created my own company called The Grown Ass Business. So it's called The Grown Ass Business because I teach a lot of creatives and visionaries and founders how to turn their passion and their business into a grown-ass business that's running like a business. So that's how we got here.
Okay, well, that makes sense. And you know, and that will resonate with some of the folks, I think, in my audience, because there are folks who got into this business, whether photography, whether they're a photographer, whether they're a printer, they make pictures or things, because they like the category. They like it, right? Or they got into selling cameras because they like cameras, right? And then at some point you realize that it needs more than that.
Yeah, I need this to pay the bills regularly. I need it to be predictable. I need to not feel exhausted and burned out all the time. I need to start feeling like the business isn't running me. Right. Yeah, all those things.
Because you always hear, like, from the startup community and the entrepreneurship ecosystem and industrial complex, as I like to call it, where, you know, it's all about workshops and seminars and all these things. And they talk a lot about passion. You got to have passion. That's the sole thing you need. And I'm thinking, I mean, I'm sure it helps, but if you can't do the thing you say you're going to do, when you're going to do it, the price you say you're going to do it, you don't have a business. You've got a hobby.
Yeah. And I think that actually, if you run your business from passion, you have more of a hobby than a business.
Right. Okay.
Because the thing about passion is what keeps you going on those days where you're really tired or you're
Sure.
discouraged or you're beat down?
Right.
Probably not passion. Right? Because passion is a finicky lover. So I think eventually entrepreneurs either get tired and quit and burn out, or they go, okay, now it's time for me to stop attracting myself to the shiny object things that keep promising me the quick fix. It's time for me to get real. It's time for me to really make this thing work. I really want it to work so I can go home at night and I can have dinner with my family or by myself, or I can,
or even have a family.
Or even have a family. My God. Yeah. I mean, I'm in my 40s and I only just now have a family. So, and a lot of that is due to my just history as an entrepreneur. So
Sure. Yeah. You've had an interesting evolution from, like I said, creative, and then you kind of, which actually mirrors a lot of the people that I know in the industry, right? A lot of the people running some of the biggest photo labs in the country, started out as photographers, right? And they got into printing because, gosh, they wanted to be such not control freaks, but they wanted to have control over how the prints looked. So they started their own labs, and then it eventually grew out there. And then they stopped actually doing a lot of photography, right? They kind of fell in love with the process of being a business. Do you think that's typical? And if so, why don't more workshoppers and people like that talk about that? It seems like that part's not talked about very much.
I actually don't think that's typical.
Okay.
I don't think it's super typical. Now my nerdy data brain is like, ooh, Gary, let's do a study. I'd love to know. That's a great question. I'm going to guess it's 50-50. I know a lot of creatives who go, you know what? You taught me all the things and I hate the things. And I just want to paint when I feel like painting. And then they don't turn it into a business. And I always say, good for you.
Exactly.
Good for knowing yourself.
Exactly.
That is the best move and decision you can make for yourself, because the last thing you need to do is turn your passion into a business if you don't actually enjoy the process of making it into a business.
Right.
Because business in itself is its own craft.
Sure.
So if you're only into your craft of photography or developing or whatever it is, and you'd find that you don't like the things about business, well, you're going to have a very frustrating journey as a business owner.
Right.
But business is its own art form. It really is its own art form. And as an artist, as a former dance teacher, I always joke with people that I'm a very, very good business coach, and I'm also a certified mindset coach. But I always say everything I ever needed to learn about coaching somebody through something difficult, I learned from teaching tango. Because business, like all art forms and sports, has its own set of rules, and it has a language, and it has an understanding, and it's a game, and you need to understand the positions and how the positions play, what the rules are. You need to understand those things. And like all good art, you need to understand the rules before you can break the rules.
Sure.
Because the best artists break the rules. And you can break the rules in business, but you kind of have to understand what rule you're breaking. So it is an art form in itself. And I think sometimes what happens is there's probably 50% of the people that fall in love with the sport of business. And there's probably 50% of the people that go, nah, I just want to keep doing some photography when I feel like it.
Right.
And that's great.
Yeah.
That's cool too.
Yeah, because I think part of it is, people get into this idea that, hey, I see the art, right? I see the thing you make. I see you dance. I see your pictures. I hear your music. You should go pro.
Right.
It's just
right.
Maybe not, right?
Yeah. I think it's interesting if you pay attention to, I like to look at athletes because they're a great example. They're a very externalized example of what it looks like to take the passion to pro.
Sure.
But with the Netflix series that show some of these world famous soccer players and kind of shows behind the scenes, they have no life.
Right.
They train and eat grilled chicken and veggies for 9 or 10 months out of the year.
Right.
You see pictures of them spending their money on the 1 month of the year that they have off. But
right.
You know what I mean? The rest of the year, they're still in very intense, boot camp level training. And I think that we forget that when somebody says,
Well,
"Oh,
and,
you
all,
should do a
and
pro."
frankly, all creatives have that. How many hours does it take for someone to prepare a dance piece for performance? You're talking hours upon that. When you talk about, if you're
Or
painting,
like
how
two
many
minutes on
hours
stage,
does it take to actually?
hours and hours and hours and months and months and months
Yeah,
for 2 or 3 minutes on stage.
exactly. And then same thing with painting, same thing with
Mhm.
photography, where, you may, if you're doing the old school chemical stuff, right, you're spending hours in a dark room trying to dodge and burn to make that picture just right and all these other things. So I think that's sort of the thing that happens with the passion piece, right? Is they see the outcome, but not what's below the surface, right? It's like an iceberg in that sense. I think business is a lot of that way too. When you see people who are successful in business, who've quote unquote made it, whatever that means, you didn't see them the time they were sleeping on the factory floor, or they were struggling to make payroll, and they had to beg their wife for a second mortgage so they could buy that piece of equipment that's going to have them turn the corner, or whatever those things are. You just don't
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah. And now it's more trendy to talk about it. So you starting to hear those
Yeah,
stories.
yeah, yeah.
But every successful entrepreneur has many of those stories that they often don't share.
Mhm. So let's talk a little bit about, sort of the challenges that these business owners have about avoiding burnout, because that is one of the things you
Hmm.
talk about.
Yeah.
I know there's not a checklist, there's no quick fix, because we've talked, there is no quick fixes to this. So how can somebody identify when burnout is starting to be a problem, right? Because whether can they self-diagnose it, or do they have to wait someone on their team to slap them upside the head and said, you need to take a break?
Well, hopefully both. I think it depends on how your personality is. I mean, I am basically a pro athlete. So I'm probably the worst judge if I'm getting close to that place. But I do have people on my team who go, no, like I was on my third flight in the past 3 weeks to my third event. And I was telling my assistant, oh, I'll do that thing for you from the plane. And she said, no, you will not. You will sleep on that plane. And I
Right.
said, oh, yeah, good call, good call,
Yeah.
good call. I see you. I got you. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm not the best at judging it myself. I think some of the symptoms are it's actually in the actions that we find ourselves doing.
Hmm.
When you are already like, okay, I am exhausted. I feel my brain feels fried. My eyes hurt.
Hmm.
I can't remember things. If you're having conversations and you can't remember
Right.
important names or things that you talk about all the time, those are really obvious extremes.
Sure.
But I think the beginnings of burnout are more interesting, which is, are you spending your time and focus and energy obsessing on the little things?
Hmm.
Because I did this thing last year. I asked on threads, I asked people, hey, I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you think causes burnout? Because I find, especially in the female entrepreneur space, women are
Hmm.
always talking about burnout. And that's also probably because a lot of female entrepreneurs who have children are also probably balancing a lot of things.
Hmm. Sure.
So I asked the audience, I said, what do you think the definition of burnout is? The really cool thing was I got brilliant answers back from people who complain about burnout and say they're struggling with burnout, but they knew what the cause of burnout was,
Right.
which was often not having a clear sense of direction, not knowing how I'm going to get to the next goal,
Hmm.
not even having a clear vision and clear goalpost. So I'm just working to work. That's like the classic when you find yourself and you're just working to work and you're going through the motions and you're kind of just going through your to-do list every day and you're just kind of showing up. That's a sure sign that you're headed to burnout.
Hmm.
Because what I found in this community, everybody answered when you really don't have a clear map. So
Right.
you're working, but you don't see an end in sight. You don't see the honeypot at the end of the rainbow.
Right.
So
Well,
actually,
well, the old Stephen Covey thing, right? Begin with the end in mind, right?
which is what I do with my clients all the time. So I found it fascinating that these people who struggle or say they're struggling with burnout had a clear definition, just didn't really have a practical way of turning that around. So I always say in your business,
Hmm.
what's the goal?
Hmm.
Is it a specific number? Is it a lifestyle?
Hmm.
Is it a legacy business that you want to hand down in your family and you want it to be a brand that outlives you? Is it something you'd like to do for a few years and put aside good money for retirement? Is it something that you'd like to grow and scale and you want to sell?
Mm.
But you need to know what that end in sight is. What is that goal for you that you're trying to, and the goal can move, but you need to know what it is.
Right.
Because if you have a clear goal, you can work backwards from the goal. So today, when I'm feeling a little tired, I may look at my whole to-do list and go, I'm a little too tired for that to-do list today. But if this is my goal, I know that I need to do one thing today. What is that? And I stay focused and I can stay fresh. And I'm not just showing up and going through the motions and getting a bunch of tasks done and kind of wondering, what does it all mean and what's it all for?
And part of that could be even delegating some of those tasks, right? Knowing what is okay to delegate, because as you and I know from a lot of business owners, they tend to be, very possessive or control, or can be possessive and control freaks in a lot of ways, in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you have a clear, big goal in mind, it actually helps you become a better delegator. Because now you go, okay, well, I can't possibly spend an hour a day in my emails if I'm going to change the world with my business. I got to start delegating some of that stuff. Right? So it helps you also prioritize where you're spending your time.
So when you use the phrase like a true business, right? When that was sort of, and some stuff I've read about, you talk about, what is your definition of that? What do you mean when you're saying you want to operate as a true business? Is that where you're talking about like the hobby thing, or is it the change the world thing, or what do you think that is?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Marketing is a puzzle. You can either give into the confusion or learn to love the solve. On the Axiom's Real Talk About Marketing podcast, guests like Aaron Schaefer of GM share how to manage challenges.
Make sure that you're not fixed in terms of what you're thinking about. The team's going to change, and the way teams operate are going to change. COVID was a great example of that. The industry is going to change. Are cookies going away or not? That was another great example of that. And so how do you continue to evolve as the space evolves?
Guests from HP, The Trade Desk, and Databricks share thoughts on today's marketing landscape. Find Real Talk About Marketing on YouTube, Axiom.com, or wherever you hear podcasts.
I think a true business is a business that runs like a machine, a business that knows how to play the game of business. So what I mean by that is, even if you have a very small team, if you're a solopreneur or you have, a 2 to 3 person team, you build a business that runs like a machine. And that machine looks like having clear departments, for lack of a better way of saying it. We understand, like I have a small team, but I understand what my role is as the CEO and founder, what I really need to own.
Right.
And I understand what metrics and tasks and projects and departments other people in my business need to own. So what happens is I'm not building a business around me and around me doing all the things and me getting exhausted, but I'm actually building over time, I'm building a business based on systems. So for example, I have intellectual property. I have a methodology that I've created. I have a way that I have created a way that I deliver that methodology. It happens the same every single time that I sell it. I have a marketing machine. I know which of my channels work for me in terms of marketing. And I know how to make content for those marketing channels. And I'm looking at my marketing in a systematic, metric-based way and understanding what worked, what didn't work, what can I tweak, what can I learn, where can I grow, where can I expand. I'm not just creating content and kind of spraying it on the wall and hoping for the best, but I'm approaching my marketing department as a marketing department. Even though I don't have a marketing assistant or a head of marketing, I approach my marketing in the way that I teach, which is if I did have a CMO, if I had a chief marketing officer in my business, what would they do? And what are the questions they would ask themselves? And what are the answers that they would have to report to me? What are the metrics that they would look at? And so what that does is then I don't feel like I have to be on every social media platform. I have to also have a podcast, and I have to like people tell me all the time, like, oh my gosh, it's so great. You have such a great voice. And we talked about this earlier, you and I, right? When people say, oh, you should turn that passion and go pro. Well, people tell me all the time, oh my gosh, you should have a podcast. No, I should not. I know how much work it is.
My podcast.
Right. I know how much work it is. I know that I would be adding a whole other channel with its costs of production, editing, absolutely not. That is not the channel that my business needs right now. I'm happy to come on people's shows and talk about all the stuff that I love talking about, but I have podcast clients and nope, it's not for me.
Sure.
So when you run your business like a business, you start to go, I know what works for me. I can run my marketing campaign, and at night I can eat dinner with my husband and play with my 7-month-old and maybe watch a movie and have a life.
Right.
But if I'm not building that real business that starts to run on its own, and ultimately the goal is that you build a business that runs without you needing to pull all the levers and turn the knobs and, fix the loose screws. So
you touch on something that I want to come back to is kind of, you got a creative person, right? Creative people like to create. How do they resist the temptation?
I felt your deep sigh there.
Shining, right?
It was like, how do we talk about this?
Right?
How do we resist the temptation to, what'd you say?
Taste the shiny, right? I mean, to find the shiny object, right? Hey, listen, this works for me, and I got to do this on TikTok and things, because I've been to conferences like that in the industry where they talk about, you need to be on TikTok, you need to be on this stuff, and it's like, do you really? Do you really? Just because, my advice to people has always been, just pick two. Just pick two. Just start with two.
I love that advice.
And
That's
figure it
great
out,
advice.
make that work, and then maybe play with another one, but just don't spread yourself too thin. You don't need to be everywhere.
I agree with that. I was told by many people, you're so great on video, you have to be on TikTok. And I tried. But the problem is when you get on a new platform, each platform has its culture.
Sure.
So it's not just, oh yeah, I happen to be great on video and I can make videos and I can post them. No, I also have to understand the ecosystem and the culture of that world and that platform. And I have to get into it and I have to be involved. And so it doesn't work for me because I'm not a scroller and I don't really enjoy being on TikTok.
Right.
So it's not going to work for me as a platform.
Right.
In terms of the question about creatives and how do you get around that? I think there's several ways to get around it. One, we go back to what we said earlier, where you just accept that you're a creative and this is a hobby business. I think if you accept that, it's a way of self-love. It's a way of loving yourself, accepting who you are, accepting where you're at, and going, oh yeah, I'm always going to be a creative and a passion person when it comes to my creations. And I'm not going to turn it into a business. I just don't like to. That's option one. Own it. Option two is you hire some people around you who are more systems based,
Right.
who go, okay, we're going to let you have that one shiny object thing that you want to do this quarter or this 6 months.
Right.
You can't do 5 of them, but you can do one.
Right.
Right. So for example, I used to be a COO to a very creative young influencer entrepreneur. And she was literally that person that every day would come into the morning. I was there from 8 a.m. on. My team would come in around 9. And she was that person that would like barge in at 11 a.m. and go, I have an idea. We have to do. And she'd start spitting out to all my team, like, you do this. And I'd be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay. Right now, we're working on this partnership, this thing, right? The dev team is doing this. Like, so is this a must do right now? Can we just make a deal that we do one of your special projects per quarter? But so if you can't do that for yourself,
Right.
you've put somebody in your world who goes, not right now.
Right.
We made a deal. And this quarter, your special shiny object project is XYZ.
Right.
And then you go to that person and say, do you want to give up XYZ for this new idea?
Right.
So you need to know yourself.
Right.
Right. I think I'm pretty good at staying super focused because I teach this stuff all the time.
Do you think that comes from the dance?
Yeah, I definitely think that I have a very, very disciplined background of dance.
Because I think people don't understand, like, dance is very mentally challenging.
Very. I mean, some dancers are some of the smartest people I know in the world. It's very mentally taxing. It's a very difficult sport. And I call it a sport because you are as much, if not more, of an athlete than many athletes. So, but even so, I have somebody on my team who sometimes will go, Celi, stop it. And that's my key word. That's what I say to my clients. So I always tell people on my team, I give my personal assistant permission to say, stop it.
Right.
And she's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yes. If you ever see me trying to do too much or go off the rails, you have 100% permission to tell your boss, stop it. Now that's me. I like when people talk back to me. I like when people aren't scared of me. I like when people are like, you're doing that thing you tell your clients not to do, stop it. And I'm go, oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I almost went off the rails, didn't I? Because I'm a creative too. And so I can go down that road too. And the other problem is some visionaries, some entrepreneurs are really, really smart and we're capable of a lot. So you put a lot on your plate. This is the beginning of burnout too. When you put more and more and more on your plate because you know you can. But just because you can doesn't mean you have to. It doesn't mean that's the pace that you necessarily want to keep up every day of your life.
Right. Doesn't mean you should, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? That's the old saying.
Yeah. And so even me, who is like the queen of stop it and getting people focused on the right strategy, because that's what I do, I let everyone around me tell me to stop it if I'm trying to do too much.
But for someone to be able to do that, to have the mental fortitude to do that, because really what it is, you have to agree that if someone tells you that you have to do what they say, right? If your assistant says, Sally, we need to stop this. We're not doing a TikTok promo. And you say, but I really want to, and I'm going to override you, right? I mean, you have to agree to abide by what they're saying, because what's going to happen is they're not going to feel comfortable anymore being honest with you.
I think that's a really great point. And I think what overrides everything is, what is your goal?
Right.
Because does the TikTok competition or the TikTok challenge you just bought a course of and you want to do for 30 days, does it actually measurably get you closer to that goal?
Right.
And is the goal still juicy and exciting enough that you can go, oh yeah, I probably don't need to do that. If I'm actually going for this goal, I probably need to put that thing down.
Right.
And yes, it takes mental fortitude. This is what I coach people on all the time. It's why people hire coaches, honestly. I used to think, once people have all the skills that I give them and all the trainings that I give them, they don't need me anymore as a coach. Now I realize that was very naive thinking, because we all need somebody to kind of keep guiding us towards the thing.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of reasons why we even avoid our goals sometimes, but that's more of a mindset thing. But the way around that is, wait a minute, is the thing I'm working towards so sexy and exciting that I can put down this short-term dopamine hit?
Right.
It's keep my eyes on the prize. Maybe it's that new home. Maybe it's early retirement. Maybe it's retiring somebody in your family. Maybe it's spending more time with your kids. Maybe it's revolutionizing a part of your industry and how things are done. But is it super juicy and exciting enough that you can put this shiny thing down and go, just like a dog, like, ooh, right, bigger ball, bigger, more colorful, more exciting ball. I want that one.
And also you may not realize that your goal, whatever it is, may have multiple stages.
Yes.
That's part of the recognition too. You're not going to get to in 5 years, I'm going to retire because I'm going to make $30 million. It's like there's a whole lot of mini goals that lead up to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But you're going to get there a lot faster if you drop the TikTok challenge and you drop those things along the way, right? Because what happens is, when burnout is also this thing that happens to us when it's like, but I'm doing all the things and I'm working so hard and I don't really feel my revenue this year was the same as last year, but I feel like I did so much more and I worked so much harder, and yet I'm still kind of in the same place.
Right.
That's also why you start to feel burnout, because you're actually, it's not just the level of exhaustion and doing too much. It's when you're doing so much, but you feel like you haven't actually made any progress. That's exhausting.
Is that maybe a sign as well that it may be time to exit the business?
If you haven't made any progress?
Yeah. Or just you're feeling that way, right? You've been at it for 2 years and you're kind of leveled off and you're like, I've given this all I can, and maybe that's all there is for me.
Yeah. I think that's a sweet spot to be in, where you get to ask yourself that question.
Right.
Because usually when you get into this place where it's like, wait a minute, I've been working really hard and I'm kind of in the same place, that is actually a sign of the way you're doing things has to shift and change.
Right.
The question is actually, am I willing to change?
Mm-hmm.
Am I willing to take feedback? Am I willing to look at things differently?
Right.
Am I willing to maybe show up differently in my business to get to the next milestone? So that's really the question. Not should I quit, but something probably needs to change here.
Right.
Am I open and willing to changing how I'm doing things?
With that question, where can people go to find out more about your business and maybe ask you that question?
The easiest way to find me is your audience is probably visual, and they're on Instagram, I'm guessing. And all my handles everywhere are Celi Grows Business, CELI Grows Business. And I'm very easy to find on not all platforms. I'm not really active on TikTok anymore for the very reasons we talked about. But on Instagram and LinkedIn and YouTube, you can find me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Celi. It's been great talking to you. I know a lot of people are going to get a lot out of what we just talked about because I think it resonates and will speak to them because a lot of them are going through that. So thank you so much for your time and best wishes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.